After a series of losses, conservatives get a victory at the U.S. Supreme Court, rebuffing President Obama's EPA moves that experts say would cripple the coal industry. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. After chalking up two solid wins in President Obama's column last week, Supreme Court justices went the other way today in a big ruling against the Environmental Protection Agency's war on coal. The majority ruled that the administration's attempt to regulate the industry into oblivion is not worth the cost. Shannon Bream is at the Supreme Court tonight.
In the last of its opinions for this term, the Supreme Court put the Environmental Protection Agency on notice, making it clear that the agency cannot issue sweeping new regulations without considering the real-world cost of compliance. Michigan and 22 other states had argued that the EPA's new rules regulating power plant emissions were wildly out of whack, touting roughly $4 to $6 million in health benefits, yet ignoring nearly $10 billion in compliance costs. Writing for the majority, Justice Antonin Scalia said, quote, "One would not say that it is even rational, never mind appropriate, to impose billions of dollars in economic costs in return for a few dollars in health or environmental benefits," ultimately holding that the EPA acted, quote, "unreasonably when it deemed costs irrelevant to the decision to regulate power plants."
Today's decision affirms a very common sense principle that EPA too often ignores, and that is that agencies must consider both the benefits and the costs of their regulations.
In her dissent, Justice Elena Kagan found the EPA had taken some costs into account and said the majority's, quote, "micromanagement of EPA's rulemaking based on little more than the word appropriate runs counter to Congress's allocation of authority between the agency and the courts." The EPA maintains that for every dollar spent to reduce toxic pollution from power plants, the American public would see up to $9 in health benefits.
It's not a setback, it's an extra step, but this rule's been a long time coming.
Critics of the new rule predicted the compliance costs would be so overwhelming that they could force some plants to close, block the opening of any new ones, cost thousands of U.S. jobs, and cause electricity costs to spike for all Americans. But they shouldn't celebrate just yet. The administration is vowing to move forward despite today's ruling.
There is no reason that this court ruling should have any impact on the ability of the administration to develop and implement the Clean Power Plan.
And like the other two final opinions we got today, this one was a 5-4 split. Bret.
Shannon, some breaking news out of the court late today with regard to this tough new abortion law set to take effect in Texas. What can you tell us about that?
Well, abortion doctors and pro-choice clinics in Texas said the new law went too far. They had applied for an emergency stay here at the Supreme Court. The law was set to go into effect July 1st. That stay was granted late today. That means abortion doctors will not have to have hospital admitting privileges within a certain radius of the clinic, and the clinics won't have to be up to the code, say, of a surgical center. A number of justices dissented, saying they would not have granted this stay. By the way, it is temporary until the court makes a decision on the underlying case itself. Bret.
That's a key point. There are actually two other final opinions today. Can you summarize those?
Sure. The court upheld a 3-drug protocol a number of states use in carrying out death penalty executions. Some inmates had challenged that, saying the first drug was unreliable. There were signs that some people were sometimes conscious or feeling pain before they were actually executed. The justices found it did not violate the 8th Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishment. The final case dealt with who has the power to draw congressional districts in Arizona. They use an independent commission. The court said that was fine with them. It complied with the law. Lawmakers had argued they were the ones given the power by the Constitution. Bret.
And that could have political implications. Shannon Bream keeping us covered at the U.S. Supreme Court. Shannon, thank you. Despite today's Supreme Court ruling, the Obama administration is going full speed ahead with its regulation agenda. Correspondent Rich Edson tonight on a milestone mark for Regulation Nation.
Finalizing rules on Obamacare and Homeland Security this morning, the Obama administration has implemented its 500th major regulation. This according to a tally by the Conservative American Action Forum. Federal law defines a major rule as one with an annual economic effect of at least $100 million or that significantly harms competition, employment, or investment.
Regulations can either reduce profits, can either lay off employees, or eventually these costs have to be borne by someone, and typically they're borne by the consumer.
The group highlights the most expensive as 2 auto emission regulations it claims will cost more than $200 billion combined. Efficiency standards on appliances like refrigerators, the forum says, will cost more than $25 billion.
Well, every administration says that they balance costs and benefits, but just take a look at fiscal year 2012 when the administration admitted it was the most expensive in terms of the way they did cost accounting.
The administration says conservatives are overstating the costs, and in a statement, a spokesperson says, quote, simply focusing on costs ignores the high net benefits to Americans from many regulations in terms of promoting health, safety, and welfare, as well as reducing long-run costs to the American economy. She says those savings during the Obama administration total about $200 billion.
People expect the government to protect them, to make sure that the food they eat is safe, the water they drink is clean, the air they breathe is clean, that workers are protected. And I think a lot of the actions that we're talking about in this context go towards all of those goals.
Now, as for that 500th major rule, the Independent Government Accountability Office refuses to confirm that total, saying they keep no such count. However, a search of its database confirms the milestone. Brett?
Rich Hudson, live on the North Lawn. Rich, thank you. Everyone is still talking about last week's decision legalizing same-sex marriage across the country. Here tonight with a look at that ruling and what it tells us about the court is senior political analyst Brit Hume. Good evening, Brit.
Hi, Brett. 50 years ago, in overturning a state law against contraception, a Supreme Court majority discovered there existed in the Constitution a generalized right to marital privacy. This is not the privacy provided by the prohibition against unreasonable searches and seizures or any other explicit provision. Rather, it found this right in, quote, penumbras, which it said, quote, emanated from various other parts of the Constitution, which had somehow gone unnoticed for nearly 2 centuries. 8 years later, the court determined that this recently discovered privacy right contained yet another right, the right to an abortion. Despite the widespread public approval of the results of these cases, few lines of legal reasoning have been as widely ridiculed. This is the risk the court runs when it reads into the Constitution rights that simply do not appear in the document itself or in any previously understood interpretation of it. That's clearly what the majority has now done in discovering a constitutional right to gay marriage. Not only is such a right brand new and nowhere mentioned in the Constitution, it is at odds with the whole concept of marriage as understood for millennia. Indeed, Justice Elena Kagan, who supported the ruling Friday, said just 5 years ago that there was no right to gay marriage in the Constitution. She was right. But the court, with her support, has now decreed there is one. An exercise not so much of constitutional reasoning, but of raw judicial power. Brett?
What about the premise of religious freedom and the challenges that may come in that regard?
Well, there are already signs that those are valid worries. The Solicitor General, the administration's lawyer, in arguing the case, acknowledged that questions about the tax exemption of religious organizations would likely arise as a result of a ruling in his favor, which he got. And you look at the majority opinion, it makes a kind of paragraph-long nod to First Amendment religious freedoms, mentioning that they could still always be advocated and taught. But he never said exercised, as the dissenters noted.
We'll see. Britt, as always, thank you.
Bet.
We'll get reaction to the court's decisions, along with plenty of other issues, from Louisiana Governor and Republican presidential candidate Bobby Jindal in our center seat at the bottom of the hour. If you have a question for the governor, now's the time to ask. Let me know at Facebook.com/BrettBairSR or on Twitter @BrettBair. You can use the hashtag Special Report. Up next, U.S. stocks have the worst day of the year. Is the Greek economic tragedy about to unfold? We'll go live to Athens. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 25 in Boston with no survivors from a small plane crash into a Plainville home. No one on the ground was hurt, but all 3 people on the plane died. The pilot told an air traffic controller he had no engine power and was gliding in the minutes before impact. Fox 35 in Orlando as officials warn boaters and beachgoers not to pick up any debris they may find from yesterday's explosion of a rocket shortly after takeoff from Cape Canaveral. They say some of the wreckage could be toxic or explosive. And this is a live look at San Diego from our affiliate Fox 5. The big story out there tonight, the city council mulls stricter water restrictions amid the state's severe drought. The new rules would limit outdoor watering to 2 days a week and prohibit irrigation within 48 hours of measurable rain. The city has been ordered to reduce consumption by 16%. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway. From Special Report, we'll be right back.